together. I want to talk about just how patient, just how tolerant, and just how forgiving he was of all the various misdemeanors that went on in his presence, mostly perpetrated by devotees who should have known better. Now, there were two ways you could guarantee to make Bhagavan annoyed. You could maltreat animals, you could mistreat the trees in his ashram, or you could try and distribute things unequally, try to give him more food than other people. Those are the two situations when you could say he had his buttons pushed and you could always get a strong reaction. But in terms of general misbehavior by devotees in the ashram, Bhagavan was extraordinarily tolerant and extraordinarily forgiving. And I want to give some examples just to show you how accepting he was of all the apparent madness going on around him. The first story is about a devotee, Ramakrishna Swami, who was employed by Chinnaswami to go to town to shop. He didn't have much time in the hall with Bhagavan. Chinnaswami kept him very busy, going to town, doing errands for the ashram management and coming back. Now, while he was in town, he started a sexual relationship with a woman in town who also was a worker at Ramanashram. So he managed to see her during the day and then sneak off to town and have sex with her at night. Now, in a small community like this, you can't proceed with an affair like this without getting found out. The family found out, they got very angry with him. I've heard two different versions of this. In one version, they asked for 1,000 rupees off Ramakrishna Swami, or they threatened to beat him up and kill him. In another, I've heard they chased him all the way back to the ashram, and he had to barricade himself inside the old hall with Bhagavan until the irate family went away. Anyway, the upshot of this was that Ramakrishna Swami was so embarrassed, so upset at the scandal he'd created both for himself and for the ashram, he left and went off to Kumbakonam. He was away for several months, and when he came back, he was too embarrassed to present himself before Bhagavan and the other devotees. He came into town and he walked anti-clockwise around Arunachala, which would be a 6-mile detour to get to Palakottu, where he holed up with his old friend Kunju Swami, who had a hut here. I think he must have come back thinking, I've got to square this with Bhagavan, I must go back to the ashram and talk to Bhagavan, but he just couldn't summon up the courage to walk in and present himself after what he'd done. Bhagavan waited a few days, and then on one of his walks to Palakottu, he knocked on Ramakrishna Swami's door and said, come with me, we're going back to the ashram. So, somewhat shamefaced, Ramakrishna Swami went back with Bhagavan. Bhagavan took him into the old hall, where all the devotees were probably gleefully expecting a right royal telling off from Bhagavan for Ramakrishna Swami, instead of which Bhagavan appointed him his attendant. Now, being Bhagavan's attendant was the most coveted job in the ashram. Everybody would have liked to do it, and there was a lot of shock and disapproval that Bhagavan had given this job to someone who had behaved so inappropriately and caused a bad reputation both for himself and the ashram. Of course, nobody dared complain publicly to Bhagavan, but Bhagavan could sense the general aura of disapproval that was kind of radiating off from all the devotees in the hall. So he addressed it immediately and said, this man behaved like this because he wasn't coming to sit in the hall. He wasn't coming here for the chanting, he wasn't meditating, he wasn't listening to my teachings. Chinnaswami kept him busy, he kept sending him to town, and in all those months he was going to town and back, he never had time to think about the teachings or about me. So nothing is going to change unless we keep him in a good environment. So I'm putting him here in the hall where I can keep an eye on him, and that's why I've made him my attendant. So still, this didn't go down very well. And then Bhagavan kind of gave a very meaningful look at everybody in the hall and said, what this man has done has been discovered. What all the rest of you have been doing and are still doing has yet to come out. So don't be critical, don't judge this man. He's committed this act, he's come back, and now we're going to look after him and try and make him improve. Now, somehow this reminds me of the biblical story of the woman taken in adultery, when Christ said, you who are without sin, cast the first stone, and to the woman he said, go and sin no more. So he told Ramakrishna Swami, this wasn't your fault. You weren't keeping your attention where it should be, on the teachings, on meditation. If you stay in the hall with me, then that will be slightly remedied. And to everybody else, he said, don't be hypocritical. You are all doing things that you probably don't want to come out in public. So you keep quiet, because sooner or later your various misdemeanors might come to light as well. Namo Ramanaya Nalam Peravarga, Vimochanamayan. Another area that he was remarkably tolerant of was people who had things, people who were brought to him having been caught stealing things in the ashram. Now there are two sides to this. Bhagavan himself insisted that everybody lock up their rooms. He said, you're responsible for your possessions. If somebody steals anything from you, don't come and complain to me. It's your fault because you didn't lock your room properly. So, for example, when Bhagavan went to the bathroom once and somebody sneaked into the old hall and stole Bhagavan's glasses. I mean, who on earth would steal the Guru's glasses? I don't know. When Bhagavan came back, he blamed the attendant for not locking the hall up properly. So generally when it came to minor acts of theft, Bhagavan, he wasn't on the side of the thief, but he would criticize devotees for not being security conscious. And Namle Swami told me that when he lived in the ashram in the 1930s, Bhagavan himself would lock up the ashram at night at 9 o'clock. Whether you were inside the gate or not made no difference. He said for some time devotees were in the habit of sitting near the ilupai tree in front of the ashram and just chatting in the evening. In those days the gate was much further towards the hill than it is now, and Bhagavan could see that everybody was sitting outside chatting away, and he paid no attention. At 9 o'clock the ashram gate got locked, and that was that, and if you were outside you were locked out. So Anamale Swami told me this was just Bhagavan's gentle reminder that doors should be closed, doors should be locked, and if things went missing, that was your fault for not being properly aware of your possessions and keeping them safe. Now, there was a man who was caught fishing in the Palitirtham tank. That's the one behind the Mother's Temple. Somebody forcibly dragged him into Bhagavan's presence. Bhagavan saw him, recognized him, and said, oh, that's just our Chinna. Let him go. He's one of our neighbors. Chinna owned some land behind the ashram cowshed, and he was probably just supplementing his diet by throwing a net into Palitirtham and catching some fish. So again, Bhagavan didn't seem in the mood to criticize people who were doing what was undoubtedly illegal. They were local people. They were just doing what they had to do to survive. But my favorite story is Somasundaram. He was guarding an ashram mango tree, which was quite close to the old hall. Now the mangoes in this part of the world tend to get raided by the monkeys, and if you're not careful, when they get almost ripe, they get raided by people as well. So year after year the ashram hadn't managed to get a crop off this tree. So Somasundaram decided, I'm going to be the watchman on this tree, I'm going to guard our mangoes, these are our mangoes, this year nobody is going to steal them. He successfully fended off all the monkey assaults over the several weeks that these mangoes were getting ripe, but then just before the ashram was going to pick them for human consumption, somebody was caught up the tree stealing them, and Somasundaram got very excited, dragged him into Bhagavan's presence, and again Bhagavan said, let him go, without criticizing him in any way. So Somasundaram wasn't very happy with this. He just spent weeks camped under the tree as the self-appointed mango guard, and he didn't like the fact that Bhagavan was not that interested in even criticizing the man who'd been caught up the tree stealing the mangoes. Then the next day, a large basket of mangoes arrived from Andhra Pradesh, and the person who was a devotee had sent them, and he'd picked out one particular mango. He must have assumed it was the best one or the biggest, and had written Bhagavan's name on it. And there was a little note that said, please Bhagavan, you eat this mango and distribute the rest to all the devotees in the ashram. Bhagavan called in Somasundaram and said, look at this basket. You thought our mangoes were growing on that tree outside the old hall. They weren't. Our mangoes were growing on a tree in Andhra Pradesh. Look, they've even got our name on them. And he showed his name on one of the mangoes. Namo Ramanaya Nalam Peravarga Vimochanamayan. The stories I've mentioned so far are all about Bhagavan's response to robberies that he wasn't directly involved in. There's one famous incident in the early 1920s when Ramanashram itself was the subject of a middle-of-the-night robbery. A group of thieves broke in and demanded to know where all their money was. They were seriously misinformed that Ramanashram was rich, where it was essentially a mud and thatch hut with only the bare necessities required for food and cooking. So they weren't very happy when they couldn't find what they expected. So one of them actually physically assaulted Bhagavan. He hit him on the leg with a stick, and Bhagavan was completely impassive, completely unmoved by this. And he said, "You've hit me on one leg. If you're not satisfied, I can offer you my other leg, and you can hit that one as well. But we still haven't got anything for you." Now, there's an interesting, when Bhagavan told this story later, there's an interesting Tamil word called puzai. So puzai can mean beating, and it can also mean worship. So Bhagavan laughed and he said that the thieves worshipped me or beat me. This was their way of showing their respect and devotion to me. They beat me on the leg, so that was their kind of worship. They're thieves, that's what thieves do. What is, for me, extraordinary is the reaction of Bhagavan, first of all, but then, not surprisingly, devotees who were with Bhagavan got very excited, very upset that their guru was being attacked, and they wanted to take violent action against the thieves. Now, Ramakrishna Swami, the same man who was in one of the previous stories, he actually picked up an iron bar and wanted to attack the thieves. And Bhagavan said, "No, patience, patience. This is not our dharma. This is not how sadhus behave. It's the dharma of these thieves to behave like this. We shouldn't reduce ourselves to their level by responding with violence. We have to show forbearance. We have to show passivity. That's our role. That's our dharma. We should stick to that. Let them stick to thieving. We will stick to sadhu dharma." So I like this example, this teaching example that Bhagavan demonstrated through his own behavior on this occasion, how sadhus should behave, and that how you shouldn't react under extreme provocation, that you should simply submit to these things and not aggressively respond. Namo Ramanaya Nalam Peravarga Vimochanamayan. Now, this Bhagavan's patience on this occasion was a single event, but there's a long, complicated drama of Ramanashram life, and it involves a man called Paramal Swami, and I think this man tested the ashram's patience to the limit and beyond, and it was a saga that went on for 20 years, and he was in the kind of villain of the ashram for 15, 20 years or more. When I talked to Annamalai Swami about Paramal Swami and said that no one had written about him before, Annamalai Swami laughed and said, that's like trying to tell the story of the Ramayana without mentioning Ravana. I mean, he really was the bad guy. Over a long period of time, the ashram came under serious provocation from this man, and Bhagavan's attitude at all times was patience, forgiveness and tolerance, which are the three themes of my stories at the moment. Now, Paramal Swami came to Bhagavan when he was at Virupaksha cave, and initially he was full of devotion, full of love. He had a statue made out of 5 different metals. He organized parades in town. He organized big celebrations on Bhagavan's birthday. He was a very faithful, very devoted attendant, and perhaps the most extraordinary exhibition of his willingness to serve was when Bhagavan had apparently acute diarrhea inside Skandashram, and Paramal Swami, to help out, to stop Bhagavan having to crawl outside and go to the bathroom, used to catch Bhagavan's excrement in his bare hands, take it out, deposit it somewhere, wash his hands and come back. Now that, I'm not sure I'm capable of service like that, but Paramal Swami in the beginning was very much in love with Bhagavan, was willing to do anything to avoid him having any kind of discomfort or inconvenience. Unfortunately, after the Skandashram period was over and he ceased to be involved as Bhagavan's attendant or Bhagavan's manager, he got increasingly hostile to the ashram management. This manifested in several ways. He pretended he was the ashram manager. He actually he created a rubber stamp that said Ramanashram, and he used to go to the post office in Tiruvannamalai and collect all the mail that was coming to Ramanashram, including all the donations that were sent to support the ashram. He would acknowledge the donations and stamp this Ramanashram rubber stamp on the letters and send them off to all the devotees he was stealing money from. There are many, many stories. In the end, or not in the end, he actually went to court in the 1930s to claim that he owned Skandashram and that he was the legal manager of Ramanashram, and he made Bhagavan suffer the apparent indignity of having court officials come to Ramanashram and take a deposition from him. He didn't seem to care how much he inconvenienced Bhagavan, how much trouble he caused for the ashram. He went from being a really good, exemplary devotee to someone who was burning with hate for Bhagavan and the ashram management. At some point in the 1930s, he wrote a small booklet whose English translation would be the Truth About Ramana Maharshi, or The Real Nature of Ramana Maharshi. And in it he claimed all kinds of completely untrue stories. Bhagavan having sex with the women in the ashram. It was a complete travesty of Bhagavan's impeccable behavior. A copy of the devotees, of course, got very excited and very angry about this. It was quite a short booklet, and Paramal Swami mentioned a couple of times, these aren't all the stories I know, I'm just telling you some of the stories. And Bhagavan just laughed and said, well, if he couldn't remember them all, why couldn't he come here? He could have asked me about all these bad stories. I know many bad things about myself. If he'd bothered to come here himself, he could have interviewed me, and he could have included more bad stories in the book. And he just laughed off the whole thing. Then, at the end of the book, when Bhagavan got to the end of the book, Paramal Swami had said, sorry, I don't have much money. If I had more money, I could have made a much bigger book, and I could have included more really bad stories about Ramana Maharshi. And Bhagavan said, well, why didn't he come here and ask us for a donation? We would have been happy to give him a donation. Bhagavan was completely unmoved by criticism, by libelous attacks on his personality, on his character. And when Annamalai Swami talked to him about this book in the ashram bathroom, he was looking after Bhagavan at that time in the bathroom. Bhagavan said, well, I've got a good idea. Why don't we sell it down by the ashram gate? He said, we've got all these crowds of people coming here. If we sell it down by the gate, the good devotees who come and see me every day, they won't believe a word of it. They'll come in, they'll just laugh at it. The people we don't want, they'll read it, they'll be shocked and horrified, and they'll turn around and go away. That will be a good filter to stop all these unwanted crowds coming in. Let's sell them this book, let's have them believe it, and let them go away and never come back. So Bhagavan really didn't care for his reputation. He didn't care that one of his ex-attendants, the ex-ashram manager, was traducing him in this way. And when somebody got really angry and said he wanted to go to town and sort out Paramal Swami in person, Bhagavan said, tolerance, tolerance, patience, patience. He just didn't want anybody to be provoked on his behalf. He wasn't being provoked himself, and he certainly didn't want anybody else to go and take action against Paramal Swami. I think he felt compassion for him. I think he felt a little bit sorry for what a twisted state his mind had got into. But again, sadhu dharma is not to react. Sadhu dharma is to take the criticism and not revel in it, but just accept it as it comes with the job. Now, before I conclude the Paramal Swami story, there's a lovely ending. I should say that in Bhagavan's day, there was a scrapbook where devotees would cut out stories about the ashram from newspapers, magazines, and they would paste them in this scrapbook so people could see what the world was saying about Bhagavan. Now, Bhagavan was a very saintly figure, he had a lot of prestige, so the stories were all good. So slowly, this scrapbook filled up with highly complimentary pieces praising Bhagavan. And then one day a very derogatory story appeared in the newspapers, which nobody wanted to cut out and paste in the scrapbook. So Bhagavan himself got the scissors, cut it out, and said, "Give me the scrapbook." And instead of pasting it on the next available page inside the book, he pasted it on the front cover, much to the consternation of all the devotees. And he said, "Everybody else is having their say. All the people who like and love me are having their say. Why should we deny access in this book to people who hate me?" So he pasted the least complimentary article anyone had ever published on the front cover of this book. Now, somebody told me this story decades ago, around the time I was sorting through the ashram archives. So I was hoping that this scrapbook with Bhagavan's critical article on the cover would show up. It didn't, but I did find this scrapbook in which were pasted many newspaper articles, and the cover was missing. So I'm guessing that at some point devotees overruled Bhagavan on this and tore the front cover off and threw it away. Now, to conclude with Paramal Swami, he finally realized that he'd gone too far. I think he became sorry for what he'd done. By that time, he'd lost all his friends, he'd lost all his means of support, his reputation was gone, his finances were ruined. I think he got a kind of instant karmic comeback on this. At the end of his life, or towards the end of his life, he came in a horse cart to Bhagavan. He was so sick and feeble he couldn't walk properly. And he said, "Bhagavan, please forgive me, and please don't forget me." And Bhagavan said, I will never forget you. Now you can take this to mean, you've caused us so much trouble, how can I possibly forget what you've done? But I think there's a subtext to this. I think Bhagavan kept all his devotees in his heart, in his grace, and that when he was promising not to forget Paramal Swami, he wasn't criticizing him in any way. He was simply saying, I am with you, you're my devotee, don't worry. And Paramal Swami then said, "But Bhagavan, I'm going to hell, I'm going to be in hell." And Bhagavan paused for a while and said, "Don't worry, I am there also." Now, there's something about that statement which has theological, philosophical implications. When you're Bhagavan, there's no state, there's no condition, there's no realm, heaven, hell, where you're not. You are present in all places. And I think he was, as well as making a philosophical point to Paramal Swami, saying, "Don't worry, wherever you are, whatever your destiny is for having done these things, I'm going to be there as the substratum of your being. I'm going to be there at all times, irrespective of where you end up, so don't worry, I am going to be with you." And I think in a way, indirectly, this is Bhagavan endorsing his famous statement in Who Am I, that whoever has fallen into the jaws of the tiger never escapes. I think Paramal Swami was a good devotee for a long time. He went off the rails. And this final encounter with Bhagavan is simply saying, there's nowhere you can go where Bhagavan is not. Namo Ramanaya Nalam Peravarga Vimochanameyan Virayma. I just want to conclude with, I don't want to give the impression that the devotees at Ramanashram were all badly behaved. I think the standard of behavior was quite high. But there was one very interesting reply that Bhagavan gave on this topic, when one devotee said, people come here, they seem very nice, they seem full of good intentions, but after a while they seem to go a bit crazy, their behavior seems to change for the worse. And in fact, some people who come here, they seem to get worse rather than better in your presence. Now normally Bhagavan wouldn't respond positively to a critique like this. He didn't like people who complained about other devotees. But on this particular occasion, he said, well, it's like a pot with milk in. He said the milk is your ego, your vasanas, your tendencies. When you come to the Guru, everybody has a certain amount of milk in there. If you have a little bit of milk in the bottom of the pan, then the heat of the Guru will fizzle, it will evaporate, and you're done, you're cooked. But he said most people come here and their pot is at least half full of milk. So when the fire of the Guru is lit under that pot, it bubbles and simmers for a while, but then it boils over and makes a big mess. So we need to be tolerant of these people, because in some instances the power of being in the Guru's presence has agitated their mind. All this stuff has to come out. Sooner or later their mind will calm down, the milk will disappear, and they'll be quiet like everybody else.
Namo Ramanaya nalam peravazha vimochanameyan virai malattal vazha.
Namo Ramanaya nalam peravazha vimochanameyan virai malattal vazha. Namo Ramanaya nalam peravazha விமோச்சனமெய்யன் விரை மலர்த்தாள் வாழ்க. அடிமுடிக்குண்டாய அநாதித் தொடர்பின் விடமுடியா